I wonder why every phase of life feels somewhat like sitting inside a transient lounge, waiting for the next flight, waiting to make the next big move, waiting to defy gravity for the freedom of the cloudless sky, waiting to touch down on the comforting tarmac of Mother Earth. Waiting is forever like the interminable terminal called living. All our wanting is followed by waiting. I'm learning to enjoy my wait. We are at the cusp of a new learning, an age of confluence. This excerpt speaks volumes about our guest for the keynote session. His mantra, when you wait, upgrade. Ladies and gentlemen, brace yourself because we have none other than Professor Debashish Chatterjee, Indian management professor, illustrious author, and columnist. He's the director of Indian Institute of Management, Kozhikode, and has been awarded the Fulbright Fellowship twice at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. With him in conversation, we have the dignified presence of the eminent, much revered and accomplished Dr. Amita Mulawatan, Chairperson and Executive Director, Education, Innovation and Training, DLF Foundation Schools and Scholarship Programs. She is also the former chairperson of the NPSC. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Ritu, for that. The question is, what kind of normal do we want to get back to? And this has been resonating in the audiences from all our wonderful speakers the entire morning. We seem to have pressed a pause on many of our social systems. And I think it's time we pressed reset, particularly in education, because all children have very, very deep talents. Every one of them has special needs. Not only those who have special needs, but all of us have special needs. Hence, I'm making a very powerful case for individualized and personalized learning. It is essential that we find our element, as Ken Robinson talked about. And what is this element? It is a personal fulfillment, that things make us, the things that make us feel authentic, the ability to discover truths of who we are and what we are capable of. To respond to these very provocative questions, we have in our midst Professor Debashish Chatterjee. The success of Professor Debashish Chatterjee has been mentioned in the formal welcome by Ritu. And through that, you can see a man who wears many hats. To me, he's been a wonderful friend, someone with whom I've had several coffee conversations. Debashish, I hope you have your coffee mug with you over the years. His book, Karma Sutra, you just have the plaque, I have the book. So his book, the Karma Sutra, Leadership in Wisdom in Uncertain Times, is a reflection which through very simple language and words creates signposts for audiences across the world. Debashish helps us in making new discoveries in which we find our way, in which we find our state of inner peace, our silences and spaces. These access points or portals help us to embrace our true selves as educators and human beings. The professor is a blend of leadership and enlightenment. It is indeed a privilege and pleasure to speak to someone who I admire and respect deeply. Ladies and gentlemen, Debashish Chatterjee. So my first question today to you is on your book, the Karma Sutra. The title seems to have very different connotations to some of us. In fact, it seems very confusing, coming from a leader of management in a world which is really moving from Education 4.0 VUCA to Education 5.0, which deals more with heritage and innovation and talks of value creation. So I'd like some of your thoughts on clearing this confusion that I have about the title of the book. Devashish. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Thank you, Amita, for your very kind words and my deep reverence and regards to the fraternity of teachers and learners led by, on this occasion, Dr. Sudha Acharya, who was kind enough to invite me. And I'm really grateful that you would really like to hear something on Karma Sutras. Amita made a reference to coffee a while back. No, many of us have coffee karma. I'm not in coffee karma, but many of us I know can't live without a delicious snack and a steaming cup of coffee, South Indian filter coffee. And I'm just wondering, what is coffee karma? So I don't want you to get confused in philosophical or revolutionary views of life. Let's look at a simple mundane thing like cup of coffee. Now, I don't seem to be able to progress in the morning without that cup of coffee. And you might wonder, why is that so? That is so because the patterns of thoughts and actions that have driven you towards an addictive engagement with a cup of coffee in the morning is very subtle when you taste coffee for the first time. These are like chains of habits, very subtle. You can't even detect you're creating those patterns of thoughts and habits. And then they become so powerful that you can't get rid of them. We heard the Nobel laureate talk so eloquently about the habit of pushing children to the margins of our society, our educational space. And we also heard an expression of helplessness when a father says, "This is my karma." Now, we haven't decoded, we have left karma as fate. We haven't decoded the aspect of karma as something that impacts us in the education space, because karma is learning to be addicted to a context. This is my karma. It is not your karma, it is your doing and thinking. Repeated actions, when they get entrenched as your behavior, you don't even notice it, but it gets so entrenched that you can't do anything about it. So the landscape and mindscape of learning and leadership in learning institutions have not changed for years. We are still in this karmic debt to our colonial past. We continue to do things, speak things, say things, teach things in ways that have absolutely no relevance to either the learner or the institution or the job market. I don't know where you are attempting to reach, but we continue to do so because you don't seem to be able to get out of those behaviors. So I thought I'll write this book, which will connect the addictive behavioral patterns with sutras. Sutras are solutions, sutras are insights, cryptic insights into how you can decode the context you find yourself in, and you feel quite helpless. You can't do much about it. There's an air of helplessness in every system. Politicians are helpless because they're anxious they may not win the next election. Bureaucrats are helpless because they don't want to upset the apple cart. Teachers are helpless because there is a syllabus and a curriculum. Principals are helpless because there's so much pressure on them to meet the demands of all the stakeholders. But out of this helplessness, the only way out is to understand whether this helplessness is a natural helplessness or it's a learned helplessness. My argument is we have learned to be helpless. And how do we help ourselves? By decoding our karma, our karmic addictions to a thinking pattern. And that's where I would raise my case, because I don't know how much time we have. We have several questions, I'm sure. So this is my take on that. So how they train elephants in Kerala is pretty much based on the same principles. When the elephants are baby elephants, they tie them up with a chain. And the elephants try to get away, and they can't. And they have entered into a belief system and a structure that even when I grow up, I can't get away if I'm tied up. So as a strong elephant is tied with a small rope, the elephant doesn't even attempt to get away because it has accepted its karma that it can't get away. And that's how we tie us.
Interesting insight that you just given, and I think it's a bit like Pavlov also. this consistent practice. And that's a wonderful explanation. So you sort of cleared my confusion. I'd like to take on the next question, which is that, we all live in a world as other creatures do, but we don't live in it as we find it. We create civilizations, we create scientific proofs, we create a world of art, of education, of technology, and even aspects that go beyond the planet. Imagination is what we have, which helps us with this. And imagination, unfortunately, is described as a soft power. Can imagination be the basis of use of this power for India in the future?
See, what you call conventionally soft power is not soft at all. It is the most potent power. It's as potent as truth or transparency, as potent as gravity or magnetism. Our physical as well as our psychological world, our landscapes, our mindscapes appear in contrasting shades of hard and soft. But what is soft is subtle. You see, the mind is more subtle than the senses. Awareness is subtler than the mind. And we evolve in our perception of the subtlety that is already inside us. So what you consider soft power is an evolving power. Look at our knowledge age that has heightened the global competition for minds, attracting talent and intellectual capital from around the world is seen as a potent tool for enhancing a nation's soft power. It's accepted all over the world. And not so long ago, India that had a long and impactful influence as Vishwaguru. You look at Nalanda, Takshashila. They are known far and wide as propagators of wisdom. Even the Chinese classic by Yun San talks about the journey of a Chinese monk to India as a journey to the West. India was literally the West in terms of aspiration, even for China in those days, because of India's soft power. And what was the soft power? It is the soft symphony of aspiration and imagination. It is aspiration that builds great nations. Transformative education is actually the building block of our national aspiration to be a global super soft power. What is this destiny that we're looking at? We're looking at educating more than 1 billion competent and compassionate citizens for the world stage. Now, it requires not just hard knocks, not mathematics, not geography, not history, but what is the nature of life? How does a human being evolve? How do you evolve from a monkey to a monk? And these are gradations of soft power that we are talking about. And so you have to understand that the hard powers that we all look for, mathematical capability, numeric, verbal ability, these are hard aspects of our education. But the softer aspect of education is that not the analytical bit, but how do you synthesize all these subjects that you learn and apply this? And the ability to synthesize is the soft power. That's where wisdom comes from. Knowledge is about being analytical. Wisdom is about knowing how to synthesize that knowledge for real impact in real world, for solving real problems of life. And that's where soft power comes into play. And that's where principals and teachers need to be grounded in the understanding of what is compassionate teaching, what is compassionate learning. And so the point is that we have to build that into not just our curriculum, but into our consciousness. So that when a teacher enters a classroom, doesn't look at children as half-grown adults, but as fully formed human beings from whom we can learn as much as we can teach, right? And so that ability to see the whole rather than the part is the ultimate destiny of all soft power aspirations. And that's what I think I will conclude. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Very interesting. I think you're talking about soft power being more to co-opt rather than coerce. And I think that's what we are looking at today. My next question to you is that, when I think about the future of education, I wonder if teaching is any different from learning. And are they not both an integral part of our being? Are we not consistently learning from our teachers, from our students, from our juniors, from our employees? And are we not teaching our employers, teachers, some priceless lessons? So how can you give me a sort of a blend of this?
Well, both teaching and learning comes from a frame in the mind. You see, teaching learning is mediated by the cognitive apparatus, the cognitive programming that is in our head. You will teach and learn only in reference to that. Please understand this. Because teaching learning doesn't happen in empty space. Schools don't teach, schools don't learn, only individuals do. And how do we teach and learn? We teach and learn only with reference to what we already have inside our heads, those mental models. Now, once you teach and learn, you recognize that we never pay attention to these mental models. So if I come to a class and I'm already worried about my mother fighting with my father, or I haven't had breakfast, my teaching learning is going to be seriously affected, right? Why? Because my mental model is not receptive to what you have to give me. So you have to look at the being element that you just talked about as a mediator. So what is being? Am I being, am I being alert and receptive, or am I being dull and self-occupied, preoccupied? Now, that state of being is only the foundation around which my mental models get formed. And so if I don't look at those mental models first, Vivekananda said something very beautiful when he was alive. He said, if I were to start a school, I will teach students only how to concentrate. I will not teach them subjects for several months. And he was essentially talking about a mental model that is receptive to the stimulus that is going to be given in the classroom. So if I don't prepare the mental models in the right frame, so am I teaching students how to learn? Am I teaching teachers how to learn? And if I don't do that, if I go straight into the mode of receiving information without addressing the frame through which I receive that information, that frame is very, very critical. And that frame mediates between teaching and learning. And if you do not look at that frame, if you don't pay attention to mental models, you are going to be in fool's paradise. And this is how most schools have pushed teaching learning to simply fixing the curriculum, and unfortunately, not much attention is being paid to those models that are in place.
So what I understand is that, you're taking us out of a context and saying, forget about the context, the challenge, the feedback, the repetition, which becomes an integral part of teaching learning, and take it into a bigger canvas. That's a wonderful nugget that you've given us. The next question is that in the face of multiple existential threats that we've brought upon ourselves, how can education be reimagined in a classroom for the survival of man and the planet?
Well, see, human beings have survived crisis of planetary proportions earlier through a process that we all know is evolution. Education is about evolving life. If educationists ask the question, what is livelihood? Livelihood is for life. They have to also ask, what is life for? And man survives by humanizing himself. That is the crux of education. The post-COVID world we are moving from production to innovation. We are seeing the trends globally, from consuming to caring. Now, the economic man, the fundamental driver of education today is the economic man. You can see the model is that my greed has made the world, my greed for more, of consuming more, has made the world rather unsustainable. And that model is still in place. Education has become consumeristic in its orientation. You can see that. So we need a whole being, like a Gandhi or a Buddha, whose reference was made today, not a billion consumers to rescue the world from this mindless consumerism. So what you call existential crisis is not about what I want to be, but how much I want to have. And this is where the challenge really lies. Now, unless you replace a mental model, as I said earlier, that talks about existence as consuming. So my existence is equal to how much I have consumed. If that model is not displaced with a better model, we'll continue to raise these questions about survival and all of that. And unless we evolve away from that model, you will see that another 10 years, we'll see devastation of the kind that we have not seen anything yet. When COVID will look quite, if we continue to consume as much as we are. So some Nike is producing shoes out of Western undersea or plastic will not. They're like little band-aids. The real crux is that what are we promoting through our teaching learning centers? Are we promoting the cult of consumption, or are we promoting the cult of humanizing a human? That is the real difference. Everything else is peripheral to what you may ask.
Right. Thank you for that. I think you spoke a little like Professor Yashpal, somebody that you admire a lot.
Yes, I do.
Talked about, we can't just be consumers, we have to be creators. And I think therein lies the catch, that how many of us are doing what.
Yeah.
The next question to you is, this is an interesting question, but can you comment on the synergy between awareness and attention? Now, both are aspects of 21st century learning in a classroom, because neither of them are present. Awareness and the attention, especially with the 2 years that have taken place.
See, attention and awareness are fundamentally different processes. They're not the same and not necessarily connected. Attention is mental activity. You focus on something with your mind. But awareness is a quality of your livingness. Attention can be switched on and off. Awareness cannot be activated by mental activity. Awareness is existential. Attention is psychological. Right? So how do I differentiate the two? You look at a man reading a novel in a very busy railway station. His attention is reading the novel. But his awareness of all the announcements being made at the railway station, all people moving around. And so as soon as the announcement of his train in the platform is made, he quickly closes the novel and he moves to catch the train. So he was aware all the while, even as his attention was focused on the novel, of his surroundings, of his environment, of his ecology. And so we have several experiments that are done in visual awareness, and we realize that we can have visual awareness without paying attention to anything. So you're looking at blankly into space, and you have everything in that space, all objects, but you're not paying attention to anything specifically, but you're aware. No, we now know that children who have this habit of being aware without specifically attending to anything develop as very bright kids, because they can process a lot more with clarity than anybody else who does not have that capability. So awareness is a gift of human life. Please understand this. Right now, what we call awareness is stuck in the oppressive tyranny of what I would call information crunching brain. So we are constantly stimulating our attention. You have a smartphone, every 10 seconds, you go there. Now, after my talk is over, if you don't feel the temptation to look at your smartphone within the first 5 minutes, I will say you are a superhuman being, because you are walking against the tide. Why? Because attention is now captured, co-opted, tethered to a device that has made you addictive, attention addictive. So it is attention addiction, not deficiency. Please understand the psychological theory is called ADD. I would say this is addiction of attention at the cost of being aware. So to be able to look at a sunset with no agenda, with no specific attention focal point, is to be aware of the large picture, how the world unfolds. In fact, a school called Rishi Valley enables kids to actually look at Astachal, sun setting, right? And they're not allowed to do anything else. And that is precisely how you awaken your awareness. This awareness that slips in a rock and springs to life in a planet, walks about in an animal, and finally awakens in a human being. So awakening of this awareness, which is the equivalent of livingness. If I'm alive, if I'm radiantly alive, if I'm vibrating, if I'm responsive to my universe, I'm aware. Because awareness is the same thing as being alive and having a life. And so this is fundamental. That difference has to be understood. Otherwise, even if you do a little brain scan, you'll see different parts of the brain are activated during attention and awareness. So you will know awareness is a general state of being alive, whereas attention is a very focused way, and it requires you to unfocus. So attention can be switched on and off. And if you do not know how to switch off attention, like you're addicted to your smartphone, you're in trouble, because you are doing it at the cost of being aware, right?
So that's very interesting. I think, as you said, that what I understand is that awareness is maybe an outside stimuli, and so it's an output, and awareness may be an input because you're looking at yourself, attention. So anyway, that's a very interesting point. I could listen to you forever, but and I know that everybody else can listen to you forever. But I'm going to ask you the last question for the day, and that is, I'm going to come back to your wonderful book, which again I read, and like all the 17 books that you've written, and I know you've got a new book there somewhere in your soul which is coming out. And so the last question is, coming back to Karma Sutra, I don't want to mispronounce it in any manner. How do you define the word clarity, and how does clarity help improve our mental health?
Wonderful question, and I wish that you asked that question. Like charity, clarity begins at home. Where clarity starts? Not with more data, not with more information. In fact, the exact opposite. Clarity comes with lesser thoughts per minute than you had before. Think of Arjuna, the classical model of focus and and capability. Now, he is looking at the eye of the bird. His teacher Drone says, Arjun, what do you see there? He says, I see the eye of the bird. Not the whole bird? No, just the eye of the bird. Don't you see the forest behind? No, just the eye of the bird. So Drone says, here is a leader. So he says, Arjun, shoot. And Arjun shoots because he has only one thought. Now, replace Arjun with anyone else here, and he'll say, oh, eye of the bird. I was thinking of birds in Mexico or Mexico, depending on how you pronounce it. And then I was thinking of Mexican food on my table and chopsticks. And from the bird, you've moved you've taken a trip around the world in your thought process. You have 100 thoughts per minute. So if you reduce the thoughts per minute, you have great clarity. Just look at, you're trying to enter a stadium where there's a big cricket match going on or some performance happening. You're wondering how you will jostle through this huge crowd and find that perfect seat on which you sit yourself. And initially, your mind is so full of clutter of anxiety and thoughts and all of that, but eventually you find that precise seat on which you are sitting, right? You have achieved clarity. Because those clutter to find that unique pathway through the clutter. Right. And so you reduce your clutter to one thought, or you are able to increase the decision space in the clutter of thought, the space for decision.
I think that's a very interesting concept, because you're talking about, in many ways, clarity brings that fragmented mind, which helps, for us to understand mental health issues.
No. Give me couple more minutes. We are not talking about clarity only in terms of fragment. We are talking about clarity as in identity. If you're clear,
right.
You will not make the mistake of getting co-opted by. I'll just give you a simple example. When I was in a little town in Bengal, I always thought I was a Bengali of a particular kind. I was a East Bengali, not a West Bengali, not East Bengali. So my identity was around being a Bengali. And then I moved to Delhi, went to JNU for my first master's. And I was considered somebody among in Delhi, but I was not classified as part of my mohalla or my para, right? Or my little space in Bengal. And then I went to Mumbai to work, and I was considered somewhere from east of India. And I went to America, I was considered an Indian. If I could go to the moon, I would be considered a human species. So you can see my identity progresses as I get more clear that all those mental models around who I am supposed to be are superimposed from outside. So when there is clarity, I begin to outgrow myself. I begin to outgrow the tiny little identities, Satyarthi made a mention of borders. There is no Germany, there is no France, there is no Ukraine, there is no Russia. These are mental models. There are only mountains and rivers and people's mindsets. And now if I have clarity, I will outgrow those little labels that I put on myself. And so you can see you have a space for decision making, for learning, which will be huge. And that's where the difference is. So if you're clear, your mental health issues will be reduced to, what is mental health? Too much of clutter in your mental space.
Great. You start sounding a bit like John Lennon, Imagine there are people, imagine there are no boundaries. You better take up singing. Now, it's been such a pleasure speaking to you today. You're truly a sage encapsulated in the guise of a corporate head working in the boardrooms of the 21st century. So as we continue to redesign learning and create places for our children in the economies of the 21st century, let us continue to dive into our cultural pool, into our cultural gene pool, and get hold of our identities and communities so that we can square the circle. Thank you very much again. Don't forget to read Karma Sutra. See, it's supposed to be a great advertiser for you, Professor Devashish. Thank you very much, everybody. God bless you. And here's to coffee conversations again. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Devashish Chatterjee and Dr. Amita Mullah Wattal for highlighting the sutras for the future of education, learning to become.